conference. We are absolutely honored today to have all the speakers here with us. We have a wonderful lineup. First, we have the wonderful Andrew Basiago, followed by Bernard Alvarez, and then the Kevin Galilei. And then we have Rob Garthier, and then Marina. The Andrew Basiago is actually going to open this up. He is running for presidency for 2016. And anyone who wants to support the truth and someone who really understands and has a great concept of a lot of underground things going on, then it's Andy. So Andrew Basiago, Andrew Basiago, I really, really thank you for really being here. It is truly an honor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Lindsay. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Basiago. I'm joining the webinar. And let me just say personally that I welcome this opportunity to comment about a subject from the perspective of pure philosophy, rather than specific subjects that have been the focus of my truth campaign and the truth movement. For example, ending the U.S. government's time travel cover-up, its cover-up of the fact that we put personnel in other celestial bodies, including Mars, which I personally visited in the 1980s. Because in fact, while I'm not a Sagittarian, I have Sagittarius rising. Sagittarius is my ascendant sign, and so I'm actually drawn to philosophy. In fact, I earned a Master of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge in 1995. So outside of my political activities, philosophy is something of great interest to me and something that I read about and I try to contribute to. So I'm happy to do that tonight. The theme of my talk is a little bit of a minor clef from the perspective of the Ascension movement. I'm a little bit of a conscientious objector about some of the concepts of involving ascending during this lifetime. So let me explain.
Thank you so much. Yes, that's great. Thank you, Andy.
Okay. So thank you, Lindsay. So I think it's very important to consider ascension during our lifetime, and I'm going to define what I think ascension actually is, because ascension is our inevitable spiritual destiny. I know that we are destined to become ascended beings, and tonight I will explain a transcendental event that I had in my life that showed me, to my satisfaction, that is the true nature of our destiny. So when people contemplate religion, they contemplate philosophy, I think it's important to pull people back from the single lifetime perspective to recognize that ultimately we will become ascended beings. Everything will work itself out. All matters involving our failure to achieve godliness or godly conduct in a particular life will be settled ultimately, and we are individually, that is, everybody who has inherited the human station on earth as flesh and blood human beings over multiple lifetimes will ascend. In other words, while I don't view ascension as something that's possible during a single lifetime, I believe that it's the inevitable spiritual destiny of all human beings, at least those living in this state of existence on earth. I think the metaphor that I'd like to use is one that was shared with me. I'll shortly share with everybody the event that occurred in my life in which this information was shared with me. The metaphor that I use is that ascension is a state of existence that's reached by living 10,000 lives. That's not a precise count. It could vary between individuals. That's more or less a metaphor, like in the Bible or in mythology. Often the number 40 is used to express the concept of many things. So the concept of ascension requiring us to live 10,000 lives encompasses the concept that we're going to require a multitude of lifetimes to learn the 10,000 aspects of God. In other words, my conception of our metaphysical existence is that we are created beings. We are, in a sense, particles of God's infinite love and consciousness and creativity. But we are being developed over 10,000 lives, again, that being a metaphor, to learn the 10,000 aspects of God. And of course, that also is a metaphor. It might be the 1,250 aspects of God or godliness that we need for the ascended state of being that will ultimately become our destiny. It is our destiny and will ultimately become our state of existence. So in this calculus, 10,000 is a metaphor simply for many, many, many lifetimes and many, many, many things to learn. And I think in light of that fact, we have to be flexible and forgive ourselves. At the same time, we have to be purposeful in this life to remember that our ultimate spiritual repose is to become ascended beings, but that because we can't achieve it in one lifetime, we have to take a realistic position on how our ultimate state of ascension relates to our affairs in this life. And now let me share with everybody what happened in my life that, being raised as a Roman Catholic essentially caused me to become more of a Hindu. I don't really adhere to any major religion. I am a person who believes in a personal God and the fact that God has created us for a discrete destiny, which is to become ascended beings and be operating at a higher level of reality. But I just use that concept of being a Hindu in the sense that the Hindus embrace reincarnation and the cycle of transmigration of the soul, and also the concept of ascension after numerous lifetimes. Here's what happened.
Yeah, Sandy, yes, please go forward with that. I'm very, very interested to hear.
Right, is our sound quality good?
Yeah, we're good. We're right on.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thanks a lot, Lindsay.
Yeah.
In 1968, I was 7 years old. I was a gifted and talented kid who had already been kind of sidetracked in my life, kind of slipstreamed in what I basically like to call the cult of intelligence. My dad was a Defense Department engineer who really, his life story is an amazing one in light of the story of our country, because he was born in poverty on the kitchen table in an impoverished Polish-American coal mining town known as Summit Hill, Pennsylvania in 1923. And before he was age 50, he would help the United States government develop time travel. So I like to share that about my dad to really emphasize the fact that he's one of the heroes of my life and of my time travel account and my life's work, which is to cause the Tesla teleportation technology that the U.S. government has been concealing out of the secret realm that it's held and use it to advantage humanity, so that in these, flesh and blood compartments that we find ourselves in, flesh and blood bodies that we find ourselves in, we can move around our planet in a much quicker and more efficient and environmentally benign way, in a safer way. So I'm growing up in my dad's household. I was the youngest of 5 children. My mother was very loving, but my parents were devout Catholics. In fact, my mother used to read the Lord's Prayer and have us do one Hail Mary at each of our beds until my eldest siblings were like 10. So through my early life there, I was being inculcated as a Roman Catholic. I was going to church, to Mass on Sunday and taking the Eucharist. I was going to Sunday school. I went through First Communion at a local Benedictine Catholic parish. I went to Sunday school K through 5. And my mother in particular was especially devout, although my dad was also, I would describe him as a devout Roman Catholic. There was no other religion and no other perennial philosophy of any other kind shared with me in childhood by the normal informants of my worldview as a child. My father, my mother, my aunts and uncles, my older siblings, my first cousins. I have from a very large Polish and Italian family on both sides of my lineage. So I spent childhood basically as the youngest of this horde of 40 or 50 baby boomer cousins, all of whom were older. But my point here is that there was nothing informing what happened from my ordinary upbringing that I'm now going to describe. What happened is, at age 7, I woke up in a bedroom that I shared with my 2 older brothers. We all had separate beds. And I went next door to the chamber of that 3rd floor of the house that my father had actually built as a carpenter. He's a very skilled designer and carpenter. On the opposite chamber of the 3rd floor of the house, which he had made into a study, I had a number of paranormal contacts in that study, as if maybe the wood that my father used to make it out of had some kind of resonance to it. I had contacts with small gray ETs in that room. But on this occasion, what happened is I woke up, I went into the study next to my bedroom that I shared with my 2 brothers, and in the top corner of the far end of the room, I saw a multicolored stream of light that was coming through the corner of the room and expanding with, I would say, even more colors than the rainbow. It reminded me of a description my father gave when he had a heart episode two years before he died in 1990.
Right.
In which he had kind of a visit to what the Bible calls Abraham's bosom, and what in the South was called Beulah land, which is kind of a paradisical garden that some people encounter on the way to what we call heaven or nirvana or the Godhead, basically the between life state. In my dad's case, he had met a number of people he knew, both his siblings and colleagues at the Ralph M. Parsons Company and personal friends who had predeceased him, and they were actually waiting at a campsite for him to get there. But he described that between the hallway of our house in Southern California and, Abraham's bosom, this paradisical state, where he was meeting these predeceased loved ones and family members.
Right.
The colors of the vegetation were so bright and so special that they transcended ordinary coloration on Earth. The most beautiful color of a flower that you might encounter in, the Hawaiian Islands or what have you. And this was the kind of light that was streaming out of the corner of the room. Literally the top interstice of the room. If you looked up and where the ceiling and the 2 walls met up at the top of the room. And as the light came through that corner, it expanded, and right in the center of the room, it formed into 3 transparent beings. A very handsome man, a very beautiful woman, and a young boy who looked not unlike myself at that age, although he actually looked more Middle Eastern or Indian than I did as an Anglo kid growing up in the United States. But the 2 others looked Caucasian, and I remember just how good looking they were. It was almost as if they had accepted or picked their immortal body, and they looked very perfected. Their features were very distilled as human beings. And I knew they were there. I was wide awake at this point. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I was standing there, and they formed in the middle of the room. They certainly knew who I was.
Right.
The woman did most of the talking. She was basically
Go
there
figure.
to impart the lesson to me.
Right.
And what she said is, she said, "Hello, Andy." She knew me personally. And she gave me her name, but in the intervening 47 years, I don't remember what it was. It was a name kind of like Athena, but that's not what it was. It was kind of an elegant woman's name, a beautiful name like Athena or Alexander or whatever, but it seemed to be a personal first name rather than some mythological name. In other words, I don't think she was the embodiment of some mythological construct like Astarte or something, Ishtar, or Isis. I think she was a real person, and that was her real name.
Correct, yes.
And she said, "We know everything about you. We've been observing you. You're destined to do great things in this lifetime on Earth, and we're here to impart some understandings to you so that as you go through life, you will be able to deal on the basis of love and knowledge rather than fear and avoidance of danger."
Andy, I can totally relate to that, as we spoke earlier about some of my previous experiences, we have a lot of things, you know, in common with this. And like I said, again, I really do appreciate you. So just continue.
Now, in the Christian religion and some others, angels are basically messengers. Angelos, which is the Greek stem for angel,
Correct.
means messenger. So these individuals are certainly messengers. But here what was odd about how they identified themselves. She explained that they had me under observance, and they were very happy about my development. And this was at age 7, really, where I had already teleported from New Jersey to New Mexico with my father. Maybe they had observed that and saw that it really didn't cause any disruption in my life, my behavior, my emotional life. I kind of rolled with the punches.
Right.
After a very kind of violent teleporting, from the perspective of a 6-year-old from New Jersey, it was certainly a kind of a disruptive experience in my life.
Right.
Teleport, get used to the effects of that. But I was rolling with the punches and actually enjoying the program, enjoying the incipient time travel that I would ultimately be involved in. Because Project Pegasus, which I was serving in, was the advent of time travel, period. Everything else is sidebar, okay? Pegasus was it. Pegasus was where the U.S. government was developing time travel and succeeded in developing time travel by 1970. So at this point, I had teleported in real time between New Jersey and New Mexico, but not yet time travel. And they did not say they were angels, however. They said that they called themselves the Ancients, which oddly, just like terms like Stargate, Project Pegasus, and Project Pegasus, would find their way into the scripts of television Stargate Atlantis. There was a group of individuals in Stargate Atlantis who were identified as the Ancients. But that's what she said. And I'm not relating back, because you know something? I've gone through on the internet and looked at the titles of all of the Stargate episodes, at least the first 3 or 4 years. And I found that they were always using the term Stargate. Right. And they had entitled the 13th episode of the first show, Project Pegasus. So they have been dropping terms of art from the actual time-space program into the best produced television shows like Stargate Atlantis. But she said that's how they knew themselves. They referred to themselves as the Ancient. And then she explained that they had that the youngest of them, it could have been her or the man or the boy, had last lived on Earth as a human being 6,000 years ago. Now, 6,000 years ago, from 1968, was around the time that China was beginning.
Right.
So these were prehistorical. These had been prehistorical human beings who had ascended to a higher state of existence. Right. What she explained is that life is purposeful, that every life imparts several important messages, several important lessons that the individual has lived that life, is living that life to learn. And that after approximately 10,000 lives in which they learn the 10,000 attributes or aspects or dimensionalities of God, I and everybody else on planet Earth will ascend as they already have. And so they were referring themselves to as the Ancients relative to our culture, in the sense that these were people who had lived in the pre-Atlantean world, even before the Greek civilization, when there was some kind of golden age in which they could live 10,000 lives.
Precisely.
And then be delivered to this ascended state of existence which they were in. What were the attributes of that ascended state of existence, and why I think we should be, short of being kind of silly about it, I think we should be jubilant. I think we should be celebratory about the fact that ultimately we will ascend to the state of existence that they were presently enjoying. Precisely. I mentioned how their physical appearance and bodies were perfect.
Right, exactly.
Not to say that they were, athletic. They didn't need to be athletic, but they had extremely distinguished, distinct features and bodies that were perfect in terms of the proportion, the apparent fitness of the bodies. But the first thing I should say about those bodies is that they were light bodies. I could see right through them. This was a study where my dad had built, my dad being born in poverty and really investing in his 5 children to see that we made something of our lives. We would actually go on as a 5-some to earn 14 post-secondary academic credentials, including 3 doctoral degrees.
Right.
And that we can thank my father for, because he was making an investment in our intellectual and moral development in this life. And that was one of the lessons he was learning, how to be a father,
Right.
how to be more concerned about others than himself, and how to invest in children and their development, which is a very important task that we should all consider.
Right. Exactly.
And the first attribute that I can say that they were clearly enjoying is that they were living in light bodies rather than physical bodies, which implies what? Absence of pain, absence of injury, and absence of death. Because it's really the mortality of our body that, at least in this current state of existence that we find ourselves, that destines us for physical mortality, for physical death, and the near death and the between life state. We are eternal beings. We are destined to become ascended beings.
Yes. Exactly. I couldn't agree. I could not agree with you more. You just hit the nail.
Absolutely.
You just hit the nail on the head. What I've been saying, and etc. But go ahead. Yes.
Right. And so without any religiosity, just as a matter of pure consciousness, we should be jubilant about that fact, because life is meaningful. Like Eleanor Roosevelt was once asked whether she believed in an afterlife, and she said, "Of course. Do you think God would have wasted our lives? Do you think the purpose of life would have been to sort of chip in and try to be a good person and then be destined for obliteration from creation?"
Exactly.
Doesn't make sense.
Well,
As Mr. Fuller said, nature is always most economical. You think nature's going to throw away our consciousness?
Precisely,
No,
and that's one thing that I say to my clients. I say, even when referring to the Bible and religion and etc., whatever spiritual belief one has, it says your soul is eternal. Well, if your soul is eternal, that means it's infinite. So if your spirit and soul are infinite and eternal, that means that your soul can literally be in infinite places at infinite times. To an extent, and you're not just going to be wasted. It's never over. Eternal, like being eternal is being infinite as well.
Right, and think of the lessons we learn as a result of physical embodiment. Let me share one that just happened to me. Literally, just happened to me. I have a Band-Aid on the wound. I had the most innocent scratch from a joyful chocolate Labrador puppy that you can incur. Basically, the puppy jumped up on my leg and came down with his sharp paws on my left ankle and created a crescent-shaped laceration on my ankle. I did the most stupid thing medically that I've ever done in my life, which I'm kind of embarrassed about at 54 to have done. I went into the bathroom, put soap and water on the wound, examined the skin that was lapsing from this crescent-shaped serration on my ankle, and pulled off the skin that was loose to create basically a circular scar about the size of, or a circular loss of skin about the size of a silver dollar. What I should have done is cleanse the wound, gone to the hospital, and had the skin stitched on. So, when we're instructed to make a temple of our body, we have to remember to not, tear the carpet when the carpet's torn, to not tear it more. And that's a lesson. That's a lesson in managing physical things. Okay, so what happened is that the wound healed perfectly. There was a huge plug, basically, of collagenous tissue that was very scar-like and solid, and hence I knew I wouldn't be transmitting disease if I started taking care of my health, which again was a rightful conduct, whatever, it was doing the right thing and taking care of the body that I inhabit.
Right,
by starting my summer swimming schedule, where I usually lose about 20 pounds that I gain back in the winter.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so I went swimming maybe a couple times, and my foot became infected. It became infected to the point where I'm very nearsighted and astigmatic, so I wasn't looking down at it, but actually what was happening was my left foot was swelling totally out of shape and becoming purple, so that when my dear friend and chief of staff, and indeed my vice presidential selection, Karen Gell Kinnison, who everybody will be meeting when we roll out her vice presidential candidacy with me, when Karen insisted that I go to a local urgent care facility of my HMO, the doctor said to me, and this is the only time in my life where I really confronted this kind of crisis involving the body that I was given at birth. He said, "Partner," and I'm in North Carolina, he said, "Partner, I'm sure glad you brought this infected foot to me today. And I said, why, doctor? And he said, because if you had brought this infection to me tomorrow, I would have been sitting you down and explaining how I was going to take off your leg below the knee.
Right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember you speaking to me about that and how literally it was like within seconds you arrived before your leg basically had to be amputated. And you know, I want to.
I was literally confronting amputation.
Right.
And
yeah.
It was simply because I was so focused on my presidential campaign, and I'm still actually practicing law a little bit on the side, that, and I'm a persevering person. That's how I was raised. You know, tearing the skin off was kind of like the way I was taught to cope in the defense projects I was in. It was just a flesh wound.
Right.
Move on. You know.
Right. Yeah. And I want to incorporate that with just for 1 second, you know, because this came in through the subject of this ascension and being in this body where we experience no physical pain, and that's what led into that, you know, and one question that one of our guest speakers has, he I think he wanted you to elaborate. He just has a question. You know, what exactly is their state of ascension? Like, what did they ascend to? He just kind of wants that cleared up, I guess, a bit, if that's okay.
That's where I'm going. I kind of elaborated on
I figured.
My point was, I don't think we should bemoan the fact that we're in the physical state of existence now, because this instance of my life, which, you know, thank the creators of, you know, thank God and thank the creators of antibiotics, we saved my leg. I just have a minor wound that's now healing on my ankle. So we completely knocked down the infection, and like when I get up in the morning, my foot and leg are now the same size as my right foot and leg. But the point of kind of that little detour I went on or digression into the proper care I should have shown my body is that the physical state we're in and that others are in also impart lessons about treating your body as a temple, keeping it clean, not misusing it to hurt other sentient beings that are in the state of physical embodiment, including animals, including other humans and other humanoids and so forth. So what I was saying there is basically everything is good and everything instructs, and everything, including these issues of our physical embodiment, pain, the proper use of things like sexual pleasure and the procreative urges, and also just the care that we should give for this temple that we've been given and that we're given in each incarnation is simply another aspect that's leading us ultimately to godliness. And so that's why I went on that digression. Okay, in answer to the question posed by the other speaker, first of all, they were in light bodies that were not physical. So they had no pain. They looked like they had sensation, but there was no way to destroy the body that they were in. Okay, they were transparent. I could see through them. The second that they explained is that they were immortal, and they were no longer part of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So the transmigration of the soul is not a loop that we can't escape. The transmigration of the soul through multiple lives is the path to ascension. It is not circular and retrogressive. It is linear and progressive. The third thing that she said about their state of existence and how I should be joyful that ultimately I would reach it, and I should treat everybody else that I met in life as if they ultimately would reach it at some point in their existence, is that they could cross the physical universe in a single thought. That's how she put it. I don't know exactly what that means, but it basically means they could go from point A to point B spiritually with no physical impedance and no problem of distance of time or space. They could literally say, okay, let's go to Alpha Centauri now and advise a 7-year-old there what we just advised Andy, and that presumably is what they could do. And then the other thing she said is, having lived the 10,000 lives and not just learned cognitively, but embodied in thought, not just in thought and action, but literally in impulse, the 10,000 aspects of God, literally becoming the embodiment of divine law, she said, ascension involves always acting in accordance with divine law. So in other words, they were, in the way that we're taught that we're born one step below the angels, at least in the Christian faith. These individuals were, in a sense, born one step above the angels. Every time they acted, it was for the right, for the good. They were the embodiment of divine law. Okay, and that's a little bit difficult to get our heads around, but basically it means that they were no longer fallible humans who might do what religion calls sin, or hurting themselves spiritually, hurting others. They were always trying to implement that which is loving and expresses wisdom and furthers the creation rather than impedes it or destroys it. And they were very graceful in their deportment, their demeanor, their deportment, and how they were communicating with me. Okay, now they were explaining that they were appearing in my life to advise me to not fear, in light of this process of ascension and how I and others, all other human beings, were ultimately destined to become ascended beings. They wanted me to know that I shouldn't experience any fear about what might befall Earth during this lifetime on Earth. And then they showed me scenes of violent earth changes, some of the classic ones you see on television, of the thick trees falling into the river during the rapid flood type of scene. Very similar to the scenes of earth changes that the late and great Dr. John Mack reported in his book Abduction, that extraterrestrials have shown human beings, human contactees during the abduction experience. I call them environmental contactees, those people who have been inculcated with a sense of environmental stewardship and avoidance of violent earth changes during the extraterrestrial contact experience, as I prefer it rather than the scary term, abduction experience, because in multiple contacts with these small grays during my childhood, I was never harmed. In fact, I was helped. So these ascended beings were showing me something essentially identical to those kinds of environmental contacts with extraterrestrials. And they told me that I should not fear losing my life in such violent earth changes if they did affect me. Because if they did, I would simply die, go back to the Godhead, review my life, be reincarnated as a human being, and continue on my path of 10,000 lives towards ascension.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for addressing that, because Kevin Galloway, the speaker who asked the question before, he said, is ascension inevitable and merely a matter of time or an accomplishment that few reach? And that's, Kevin, I think what Andy's about to go into right now.
They were imparting the latter, in other words, an inevitable state of existence, because I would say that implicitly in everything that they shared with me, which was thoroughly understood by me, but at a pretty high level of discourse for a 7-year-old, although I was a bright 7-year-old, but still, they were talking to me as if I was an adult, but I was still grokking everything they were saying. I think she made it clear that, look, when the Creator invests in creating a created being and ends up with a potentially redeemable soul, but let's say in a particular life that soul chooses to be Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or Saddam Hussein and, torture and kill other sentient beings,
right,
gratuitously and with sadism, that soul is still redeemed in the process of the 10,000 lives. I would say that was implicit in what they were saying, but in point of fact, I can't answer that very good question in light of the totality of what they shared with me. They were clearly indicating that I shouldn't fear life because ascension was the ultimate state of my disposition, but I think that they were making it clear that it's the state of everybody's disposition, ultimately spiritually. But I didn't ask them, what about really wicked people? Are they redeemed in that process of the 10,000 lives or not? I didn't ask that, but again, I would say that the equities favor that that's what they meant when they were talking to me. So, right. But I think we should all remain hopeful because, look, you have to ask yourself, since the Creator has created an identity and a consciousness, when we act in an ungodly way, let's say we consciously choose to harm somebody or do what the Christian faith calls sin, okay, I can't believe that God would not allow that person to ultimately be redeemed and reach a higher state of existence, any more than we would say that, well, if a child is disobedient in a way that hurts somebody else or hurts an animal or destroys something, we don't say that child is not redeemable during their lifetime of being, a solid citizen.
Right. And it says that all sins also, in several ancient scriptures texts that all sin is equal. And if anyone really wants to look up the definition of sin, it took me a while to, I was an adult until I really read the true definition of sin. And as I grew up Methodist and etc., I thought it was just, you just do something bad. No, it's what the word sin means is doing something out of lack of love, albeit for yourself or another person or another being.
Exactly. So I would say that even though it wasn't directly addressed, the message that they were imparting to me was sort of a transcendental message of a perennial philosophy, which I would say favors the interpretation that it applies to everybody, regardless of how wicked, let's say, they are in a particular life or how many lives they live. And, it might take one person 5,000 incarnations, or it might take another person 13,000 incarnations. The notion of 10,000 lives, as I mentioned, is just a metaphor. But the critical thing is the person has to basically learn what it means to embody God, embody pure love, pure knowledge, and right livelihood. In other words, proper conduct of a fully enlightened being. That's what their state of ascension was, and that's what she was imparting. And she was also imparting the fact that I wasn't going to be achieving it in this lifetime. And that's a conceit that I'm kind of, in a sub rosa way, kind of exploring in this talk, that while we should be mindful of our ultimate ascension, the notion of ascending in this life can be illusory, and it can actually potentially steer us away from the things we can do in this life.
Thank you, Andrew.
Towards ascension.
Yeah, thank you so much for clearing that up, because, I see a lot of people are like, there's so many misguided, I guess you could say, theories of ascension, possibly, or practices, etc. And I mean, I can even speak for myself, because everyone's like, I want to ascend. Well, it's like, be careful, because ascension means a lot. There's a lot of things that go into this. So anyway,
right, and I also want to say that I'm not being dogmatic, and I don't want to sound intolerant to somebody else's conception of ascension,
right?
Because I respect everybody's right to conceive of reality as they would conceive it.
Exactly.
I'm just sharing my conviction that I think this is what ascension really means in our ultimate reality, our ultimate destiny as conscious beings.
Precisely.
And so I'm sharing it because it is my conviction about where we are ultimately headed spiritually.
Precisely, and I couldn't agree more, because everyone's reality is different. I mean, no one's reality is exactly the same, and we do honor everyone's beliefs. We have to operate in that unconditional love, really, in order to achieve any sort of ascension. And that's my opinion, and that's my opinion, and people can make their own opinions, but that's how I feel as well.
Right. In other words, somebody else's ascension might be achieving a kind of a Buddhic high, where they're sort of moving through life effortlessly, as loving and knowledgeable and wise as they can be, and they're surrendering. They've learned to transcend their baser nature, and that's what ascension means in their life. And I'm not going to assert that my model is superior to theirs or should replace it. I'm just sharing my model of ascension because this experience really happened to me. So I'm sharing it with the same passion and adherence to the truth that I'm sharing my time travel and Mars visitation experiences. This is an experience that I had that was real, and I believe, based on the totality of what happened, that it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't a delusion. I didn't have a temperature. These people really, or beings, really contacted me. But here's a strange thing that happened derivative to the contact, and then I can move on from the contact. I was telling this experience to a Christologist. That's somebody who studies the life of Jesus. It's kind of a theological discipline at the University of Cambridge when I was a graduate student there in 94, 95. His name was Daryl Hannah. He was a man, but he had the same name as the actress, Daryl Hannah. And Daryl and I were walking from our college, which was Magdalen College, Cambridge, over to the city of Cambridge library, the public library. Well, it was the county library, but it was the local public library, not the university library, because he had some books to return. And I was telling him the story of meeting these three beings because clearly what was imparted was outside of the Christian notion that everybody's born once and then the judgment, as the Bible says. The notion that those who don't accept Jesus and his sacrifice, his blood, the blood ransom of Jesus Christ, are condemned not to be redeemed. And these kind of Christian notions of you get one shot at it and that's it. And I was sharing this with Daryl to say, you're studying the life and doctrines and historicity of Jesus here at one of the world's finest universities, but listen to me as I share with you a dream, not a dream, but an experience that reveals that we're not destined for one shot at salvation. We're actually in a multi-life progression towards an ascension in which we will possess Christic attributes. Like Jesus showed up after his crucifixion, if one is to believe the Bible, as a transparent ascended being.
Right.
Okay, so I was trying to share with Daryl as somebody studying Jesus that, wait a minute, this is much more consistent with the doctrine of reincarnation, and its relevance to Christianity would be the removal of reincarnation from the Bible at the Council of Nicaea when Christianity was made the state religion.
Yeah,
and everybody was in.
They did, yet there are still, you can actually Google it, I have before, there are still thousands and thousands and thousands of quotes that have to deal with reincarnation that are currently still in the Bible. You just have to look and see.
Right, whether John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elijah, there he is, that's Elijah. So there are some kind of subtle references to reincarnation in the Bible, but the ultimate thrust of some of the monotheistic religions is, look, man, you get one shot at redemption. If you blow it in this life, that's it. You're going to inherit, a hell or a purgatory or something that is worse than this state of existence, which is a pretty heavy mental and spiritual trip to place on people. So I was sharing this with this fellow scholar who was studying Jesus to say, the message that was imparted to me really went beyond the spiritual message imparted in the Bible. And to me, it makes more sense. And I also told him how I remembered and actually proved some of my past lives. For example, I identified a musical instrument that was played in Madras in India before the Raj, when I had a life as a merchant there, that I later found out from one of the only people in the world who knew about that musical instrument. I had actually named that musical instrument to an Indian, it's actually a Sikh, taxi cab driver in Seattle, who said to me when I told him that story of that past life regression where I recovered the name of that instrument, he stopped the taxi and said, "Young man, you're making the hair stand up on the back of my neck."
Right.
Because in the late 1970s, I and a very small group of Indian and British friends, then living in London, England, rediscovered the music of the Shah and formed a small musical heritage society where we were physically building that musical instrument, and we were recovering sheet music from the University of Delhi, and we were trying to do recitals in London, and we couldn't even get the Times of London to do one small column on our recitals. And he said, I'm one of the only people in the world who knows about that existence of the Shah, and you have named it. And he says, I take what you're saying as proof of reincarnation.
Right.
So I was, as we were walking back to my college, our college, I was sharing with Daryl then some of my reincarnation encounters like that supported the notion of multiple incarnations to learn how to embody God and become ascended beings. Here's what's strange about that conversation. When we got on the threshold of the college grounds, Daryl stopped, very thoughtful young man. He stopped. He was listening to me very, very politely, even though I believed that he was sort of a charismatic Christian. And he stopped and he said, well, explain to me more about your interaction with RJ. And I said, excuse me? And he said, back when we were at the library, you said the name of the boy was RJ. And I said, I did? And he said, yes, Andy, you said they were standing there, the man and the woman was doing all the talking, and then they parted by about 2 feet, and this boy stepped forward, and they said, this is RJ? And I said, Daryl, that must have been in the recesses of my mind because I don't even remember telling you that back at the library, much less having remembered the fact that they did tell me that the boy's name was RJ, and now I remember that's what they said. So somehow that was so buried in my memory that I wasn't even cognizant of it back at the library when you shared that with me. He looked at me maybe like I was getting a little bit too deep in my studies and was kind of losing it a little bit. But then we parted on a friendly basis, and I think I enriched his theological studies by sharing this encounter, this nocturnal encounter with these ascended beings, to give him maybe a deeper understanding of what it means to become Christic. You know, as Jack Kerouac, the American writer, said, walking on water, as of course Jesus is rumored to have done in we find it in the Gospels. Jack Kerouac said somewhat comedically, almost wistfully, walking on water wasn't built in a day. Okay. So presumably, if we're going to become like Jesus, aren't we going to need multiple lifetimes to do that? To be able to be nailed to a cross and forgive our contenders for nailing us on a cross? Asking God to forgive our people executing us? Okay, so in a most painful way. Okay, so that was my message to Daryl was, look, you know, when you put this Christian anthrope on me, or any of the monotheistic religions that suggest we have one chance at salvation, at ultimate spiritual redemption, I get very anxious about that because life is difficult enough.
Correct.
And I think the more just and loving model would be one of what was shared with me by these ascended beings. So then I described the discussion, I described the encounter, the original encounter with the ascended beings, and my conversation with Daryl, who was pretty well regarded among the graduate students at my college. There were about 40 of us at the college. And one of my Indian friends in the graduate program said, that's very interesting, almost conspicuous, Andy, because you know what the name RJ means? And I said, what? And he said, it's a Hindi name that means he who has overcome. Okay, so it's almost like I encountered these three beings, and the youngest had a name that literally expressed in Hindi, obviously one of the older of the modern world languages, India being such an ancient country, literally their ascended state of existence, which was most conspicuous. You know, his name wasn't Bill, you know, it was RJ,
right,
which
precisely.
means he who has overcome.
Yes.
So that's basically the story of my encounter with the ascended beings. And they finished briefing me, as it were, with this profound cosmic message that affected the rest of my life. They then made a quarter turn and disappeared as if they were walking upstairs to my right into the wall. So a kind of a transparent, misty image of like a simple stone staircase formed, and they literally ascended and walked up into the right wall on my right side of the study, with the woman looking back at me and smiling as she was the last of the three, and they disappeared walking up the staircase, which I think was a kind of a visual cue to me that they were returning to their ascended state.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is going to be a little bit repetitive on my part, but what does this mean? What did that encounter mean to me? And I would urge you to consider it, maybe adopt it as your understanding, maybe not. You know, religious liberty and intellectual freedom are important. Okay, obviously, number one, ascension can't be achieved in a single lifetime. Rather, number two, ascension is the result of living the 10,000 lives, whatever that ultimately entails. Number three, the purpose of the 10,000 lives is for us not so much to become gods. I would reject sort of the notion of the Latter-day Saints that we're all going to become gods with our own planets and so forth. I think that's a little bit of a distortion. I think what ultimately happens is we learn to ultimately embody God in thought and action.
Right.
Now, that being the case, if we're going to assume arguendo that I'm right because this experience was real and they were imparting a profound cosmological, philosophical, and religious message to me, or let's just say I've adopted that as my understanding, what are the dangers, let's say, in my life of pursuing ascension in one lifetime? Well, the first, in my view, is that we have the danger of imposing on ourselves an unhealthy asceticism that deprives us of the full experience of life. Examples of this asceticism would be abstaining from all enjoyable foods, becoming celibate in terms of our sex life, taking everything seriously and becoming sort of a dark philosophical creature. We're also going around and always relating to everybody else as if they are pre-ascended beings rather than just people. Because right now, we're just folks. Now, let me cite the mythologist Joseph Campbell here in that book, The Power of Myth, that he co-authored with journalist Bill Moyers in the late 1980s. One of the things that I drew from that, and I think that is germane to this discussion of ascension, is that Joseph Campbell, one of our most profound mythologists, Stanford educated, but also pretty much an autodidact, self-educated in the history of mythology, and quite profound in that field, I would say. He really was emphatic with Bill Moyers in explaining that human fulfillment in a particular lifetime is to be found in seeking an experience of life rather than the meaning of life. And I always say this to people that I know who are very religious and lead with religion rather than with experience. I'll say something like, did you ever think that if you had become a downhill slalom skier right on the edge of dying, skiing down some steep snow slope, that you might have had a greater experience of life rather than, going door to door trying to persuade people to adore or to adopt your religion? And because after all, we're alive. We're in the body. We're physically embodied as human beings with everything that human beings can do that brings no harm to others. And so shouldn't we be as concerned about the experience of our life as our meaning of life?
Definitely.
And yeah.
Definitely.
I would say so. And I say this to the religious all the time, whether it's a legal colleague who is Catholic or Mormon or Jewish or whatever and leads with religion, not discriminating against any particular faith. I respect people's religions, and I admire people who adopt a religion if it guides them in a positive way in their life, like steers them towards, being a good person. But I'm really pretty adamant that I think Joseph Campbell was correct, that the experience of life is more important. Pursuing the experience of life is, I think, more important than pursuing the meaning of life, because once we take a look at the fact that we're ultimately going to ascend, the meaning of life in this life is almost inscrutable, because it's ultimately what we make it. And we make it by choosing our experience, not our meaning.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're in a bit of a Chinese puzzle here, and unable to disassemble the fact that as a result of being born as a person who can choose to be a teacher, a responsible parent, an explorer, a mathematician, a journalist, a scientist, a doctor, an accountant, whatever, and learn and experience in life. Even if, look at people who talk about their peak experiences being during their vacation. Somebody says, I just repeated Thor Heyerdahl's journey across the Pacific, and then we celebrated in Bali. People are excited about those kind of experience-based epiphanies in life more than any religious person that I've ever met who's had a religious metanoia, right? Okay, so that's my conviction. So that means that if we adhere to an ascension-based religiosity in a particular life, we may miss the boat to Bali. We may be so ascetic in our attitude that we will fail to embrace the experience of life. I think there's an analogy here to be found in reincarnation studies. Is it not the case that if we get too deeply into our past lives, we may miss the opportunity to live this one fully?
Yes.
That's why I haven't written my reincarnation book yet.
Right.
Because I'm doing real things in this life, like running for president, things that are going to affect my soul, things that are going to hopefully affect other people for the better.
Exactly. And it's like we discussed the other night, Andy, I have certain memories that haven't been unlocked yet, but we discussed a few of them. And, it's divine timing for everything, because, I'm also writing a book as well. And I was told to sleep for the entire month of April. We discussed this earlier pretty much, and that they were preparing me for something very big. And literally a month later, here we are, or less. Yeah, a month later, here we are, right now. So,
right, I'm planning a month in Hawaii this summer, where I'm just going to swim in the ocean and eat raw food, mostly fish and raw fruit.
Yes.
And just simply give myself a month vacation with no internet access, no writing, no lawyering, no running for president.
Yes.
Because I haven't given myself the experience of, returning to that savage state of existence that's in all of us.
Right.
We're all basically evolved Cro-Magnons, and we need to occasionally reconnect with the earth.
Disconnect from everything. And even, it's so important, especially when, even if you're not in this line of work with helping, whistleblowing, spreading the truth, etc., even if you're just in a mainstream job, whatever, you still need to disconnect and go back. I think it's very important and very healthy, not only for your mind, body, and spirit, back to nature, like with the essentials, which helped us evolve, with this beautiful planet that supports us. And, we really do need to definitely, and I'm still working on it myself, balancing my work, my time management with family, with everything, and I think that's a great idea, Andy. And I think you're going to have, I've got some friends in Hawaii, and I was there for a month. So
we have to make sure that while being mindful of ascension, we don't adopt a doctrine of ascension in this life that blocks our true experience of deep reality in this lifetime.
Yes, exactly.
Right? It's a kind of a paradox. In other words, we will further our ultimate ascension by ignoring our ascension in this life and directing it at deep experience. At least that would be my conviction.
Precisely.
The second danger, Lindsay, I think, is cultism. And I don't want to lay a head trip on anybody. This is kind of negative, so let me go through it really quickly. Examples of taking ascension to the point of cultic behavior obviously would be the Heaven's Gate cult, which was seeking a level above human. That may have been some kind of psyop by the intelligence community for people to not focus on ascension, but nonetheless, it ostensibly led to mass suicide. Another example would be the Rajneeshpuram cult in Oregon, which I'm familiar because two of my fellow lawyers, Larry Sokol and Robert S. Weaver, who I know personally and professionally, were involved in both the land use claim and then the federal tax action against the Rajneeshis. They were promising their adherents ascension, or a form of a level above human.
Right.
But actually, what I know from inside the investigation of that cult is that Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who people laud as Osho, as a man of great wisdom, was in it for the sex that he was obtaining, the sexual access he was obtaining with women in the cult. And Ma Anand Sheila, his manager, was in it for the money. Okay? That's from the two lawyers who basically shut down that cult and got them kicked out of Oregon on land use violations and federal tax violation.
Right.
Okay, so I just use this as examples of the fact that if we turn our ascension in one lifetime into a religion, the danger is that we'll be deceived by either disturbed people or unprincipled people who are motivated by either apocalyptic goals and beliefs or material motives. So we have to watch out that our confidence that we're ultimately going to ascend and that life is meaningful doesn't devolve into cultism.
Precisely.
It's dangerous.
Precisely.
Rather, we should use the term ascension, I submit, for everybody's personal approval, should be viewed as a transcendental spiritual concept and not a mantra that we live every day. Okay, the third danger is just spiritual imbalance. If we pressure ourselves to achieve in one lifetime what of necessity will take, the metaphor of the 10,000 lives, we will become spiritually imbalanced. And then just speeding up a little bit here. The fourth danger is the negative potential for self-deification that we find in all religions. I'm saved and you're not. I'm the wise one and you're not. In the case of the Ascension movement, it would be, I'm ascended and you're not. That's the mentality.
And that's one reason that everything that we here at World Ascension Conference stand for. We're like, hey, we're going through this with you together. We're not perfect. We're human. Like we're just like you. We're not. There's no there's not a mask here. I don't know.
We have to avoid the notion that we are currently ascended.
Because we're not.
In fact, none of us has ascended yet, and we should remain mindful of that fact, because That's the true nature of our existence now. We're on the path to ascension, but none of us achieves, well, there may be a small retinue of people who are like in their last life.
Right.
And not just saintly, but literally